All right, Trojan Construction, we are back with the belt sander. This is how to use the belt sander. Like any other tool, we're going to have a second of inspection. I'm going to check to make sure the tool is serviceable. First thing I'm going to check on a belt sander is make sure the cord is not torn or frayed. I'm going to run my hand down the length of it real quick, really focusing on the two ends, because that's generally where you get your frays and breaks in the cord. And if it's got a fray in the insulation, I'm going to repair it and continue on from there. I'm going to check the housing of it to make sure it's not cracked, especially around this belt area and this motor area, because that can hurt you. Quick once around. Then I'm going to look at the actual belt to make sure it's still serviceable, that it's not torn up or frayed, and then it's actually pretty much just there. Now when I get ready to use a belt sander, like we talked about in the introductory, there's a couple special considerations. Because first step is PPE. In addition to my safety glasses, got to make sure I have some hearing protection and a respirator. Second step, I want to make sure it's unplugged, not into a power source, and that the trigger lock is not engaged. And it's a really quick, simple process. If it's engaged, if you'll hit the trigger one time, it'll release it. Touch the trigger a couple of times, make sure the trigger lock's not engaged. Now, I want to make sure that my material is braced firmly down to where I want to sand, because as you sand the process, the belt is turning, and it'll actually grab the material and send it and shoot it backwards. So there's a couple, you can either clamp it or either press it up against something that'll hold it in place. Now I'm going to plug the machine in to an approved grounded power source. Now I've got to make a couple adjustments to it. I'm going to adjust the speed, so I'm actually hold it in one hand and run the machine up, and I'm going to turn the speed dial indicator here. Set it at the speed I want to run. Then I'm going to use, if you remember the little adjustment knob on the side, you can see how the belt right here is now offline a little bit. As I turn that knob, it will cause that belt to ride in and out, and I want to get it centered. Now that I can see that my belt is riding centered right on the front of that guide wheel. When you use these things, this trigger is, the trigger itself is not a variable speed, it's a variable speed on the motor. So I'll actually pull it, hold it, run it up all the way to speed, because you don't want to put it down and then pull the trigger. You actually want to be holding it off the material, pull the trigger that runs up to speed, and then I'm going to sand the actual material I want to sand. Now, a major consideration when you want to sand is you want to go with the grain of the material. As you can see here on this 2x4, you can see lines in the 2x4, that's the growth rings, and you want to run with the grain. You don't want to run across the grain, because it actually just creates a bunch of scratches into it. There are some times though when I might run diagonally across the grain if I've just put a project together and I've got multiple boards and it's very rough and very uneven, they're not stacked really evenly together. Now I may run diagonally across them to try to get a rough sanding, to get that initial rough sanding off of it. But I always will finish by following with the grain. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run it up to speed with step 5. And then step 6 is I'm going to sand with the grain, and then when I get finished, I'm going to let go of the trigger, wait till it stops running, because if I set it down on the table, it's still running, it will take off and run. It'll actually take off and run forward. People actually do races with these things, belt sander races and things, and put remote controls on them. Then I'm going to unplug it from its power support, and then we'll do the maintenance. So, running up to speed. And you can hear it as it makes contact with the wood. And I like to use almost a circular motion. I'll pick it up, check my work, and if I'm doing a lot, I'll engage the trigger lock, and see, keeps it running. Wait till it stops, set it down, unplug it. Then I'm going to do my 3 maintenance steps. Clean is the first one. That's probably the hardest one on these things. They create a lot of dust, and they end up with dust all over them. So most of the time, we'll end up at least once weekly getting a blower and really clean these things out intimately, and really focus on these vents here for the motor. on either side to keep these air vents all clean, because that's what keeps the motor cool. Make sure it's dry, because electricity and water don't mix. Then I'm going to check the belt to see how much wear on it is. As you can see, they're starting to get a fair amount of wear. You can see where this one's actually riding pretty much on one side of the belt, but not standing on the other. One thing you can do when these things get pretty filled up, you can actually flip these belts around and get a little more life out of them from the other side. That is how to use a belt sander.